Another subject relationship that occurs not very frequently, but does happen on a fairly regular basis, especially in databases where there are a lot of subjects, is what's called a reference relationship. It's very similar to a junction relationship in that it's forming a relationship between two of the major subjects of our database. So let's say I have a database that has two subjects, facility and employee. I've got a company where I obviously employ a lot of people, and I have multiple facilities. A facility could have many employees working at it, but an employee, let's say my policy is that I only want to track employees to one facility. In other words, an employee will only work at one facility in my company. All right, so this obviously is something that's a little bit different than having a many to many. It's actually a one to many, in that a facility can have many employees, but an employee will only work at one facility. Very much like a supplemental relationship, except a supplemental relationship, obviously, its child records were still reliant on that subject table, where the child records for this would be the employees, and they're not reliant on a facility. They are still something I would want to keep in this database, even if facility went away. So how do I do this? This is a kind of a cross between the supplemental and the junction relationship. And tell you the truth, it even has a lookup type mechanism that we would have in a supplemental relationship. And what we do is we basically create a foreign key field then in the receiving, in this case, employee would be the receiving table, that will hold the value of the facility that employee works at. Now you can see right off the bat there is something different in this versus what we had in the supplemental and the reference relationship. And that is that foreign key field is not part of the alternate key, or I should say, does not have to be part of the alternate key. It could be if we wanted, if it could help further identify the record, maybe we want to include it in the alternate key, but it doesn't need to be in the alternate key. It also doesn't need to be required. I may want to establish an employee's record not knowing where they're going to work yet. And maybe they're a new employee and we haven't assigned them to a facility yet. I still want to get the information about the employee in here. I just don't want to set the facility yet on that record, the facility they work at on that record. So I could keep this null for the time when I first create the record if I want to. At some point, I'll probably want to fill it in. This is kind of up to you. If you want this to be required when the record's created, put is not null on there, just like you would do always. To make the validation rule for that field is not null. But the main thing to note here is that the other ones that had to be a required field and it had to be in the alternate key. Here, it does not need to be the alternate key, and I'll tell you, most of the time it's not. Most of the ones I've ever built, reference relationships, it was not part of the alternate key, although there have been times when it made sense for it to be part of the alternate key. If it was in the alternate key, then you definitely want to make it a required field. But if it's not in the alternate key, it does not need to be required. So you already know how to build this. This is just like how you built set the foreign key on the supplement table. Uh, however, in a supplement relationship, I should say. However, there this is built from the subject ball object. It doesn't have a template in there to do this. So to get this field, it's going to be a lot like what you did on your category relationships. I am going to give you in your final project all the BOL objects, and you'll see in there's a BOL object called single pick reference. All you need to do is open it up in design view, select it, copy it, and then go to whatever subject table you're using. You want to use as the receiver in that reference relationship and drop that in there and create the foreign key. And that is exactly what I did here. I basically copied that in, dropped it in, went in, renamed it to be facility record identifier, and then set its property for the lookup. And that is exactly the same process as sending the property for the lookup that you had in the supplemental relationship, and for both the foreign key fields in the junction relationship. It's the same thing, same process to do that. You don't have a lookup form because employee will have its subject form, and that's good enough. They could always bounce over there to make whatever changes they need to do, and then come back to the and then and or I'm sorry, facilities will have its own subject form, so you can always bounce over to its subject form, do whatever you need to do on facilities, and then come back to employee and set it, and you'll see those changes there. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a pretty easy thing to do, actually. But here's the rub. In my experience, reference relationships sometimes don't last long. And what I mean there is policies change and they actually become junction relationships. In other words, maybe right now I'm going to say my employees only work at one facility. But what happens if tomorrow I just change my mind and say, well, an employee could work at several places? And maybe one of the things, in fact, I'll do is track what days of the week they work at a given facility. Well, now I got a situation where an employee could have, in a facility can have many employees, but an employee could work at many different facilities depending on what day of the week it is, say. All right. There is another way to represent this relationship and still have it being ready to become a many to many if you want to. And the way to do that is you make this a junction relationship from the get go. Build a junction table, join those things together, and then until you actually have that policy. So let's say I've done that. Say I've gone in and I've created that junction relationship. I have my junction table. I've got my two relationship lines and integrity set and all that, okay? All right. But now I want to limit it to be just one employee in that table. All I have to do then is go on uh, the foreign key field from employee that's in that junction table and set its index to be no duplicates. All right, I know I said before, don't ever set the indexes on multi-field alternate keys. This is a case where you can. You would go in and make that no duplicates. That way you would only have one employee record in there for the time being, but you could have them assigned to any facility. If later on then somebody comes back and says, we're going to allow employees to work at different places, you can then go in, take that index, turn it off. Now you could have the employee in there multiple times, hooked up with facilities at multiple times. And of course, together they are indexed to be unique, which is something you would want that you haven't changed. All right. And you could add the field that says days of week. And that's where you would record the days of the week. In fact, you can even have a multi-pick field that would say days of week because it wouldn't be in the alternate key, that field. It'd be outside of it. I know that sounds a little bit difficult, but it really isn't that hard. And I think some of you are, after you've done the other two relationships quite a bit, this will become very obvious what you need to do. So that's the reference relationship. Again, I probably build one of these maybe about 2% of the time. However, I have found that a lot of times when I do build a reference relationship, I'll actually build more than one. I've got a database right now where I've got 17 subjects. Yes, 17 subjects. And I've already built about 7 reference relationships in there. So it can happen. And the more subjects you have, the more likely it will happen. But again, consider that at some point reference relationships could become many to many. So if you wanted to model it as a many to many from the start and just limit the number of records that are related to one side of these, you could do that by manipulating the index on the foreign key field that is associated with the record that is on the one side of the or on the on the many side of the relationship, because you'd only want one for that for each one of those. So I should say on the receiving end of the relationship. So I hope that makes sense. If I get time, I might actually put together this example for you and make it available. But I think overall, you already know how to do this. And again, I would use the supplemental relationship to be your guideline. The step in the supplemental relationship tutorial where we set row source query for the lookup to be the way you want to do it in this particular foreign key field, in the reference foreign key field.